Welcome back, readers, to Mystery in Rocky Mountain National Park. We're on our last chapter, chapter 24, 1880. After dinner, Abe joined Hank and Abner in the rocking chairs set around the stone fireplace of Abner's cabin. "Mr. March, sir, I was hoping you could help me with something." "Well, Abe, what you got on your mind?" Abe pulled the leather-bound journal from his back pocket, opened it to his drawings of the spearhead, and handed it to Hank. The mountain man stared at the pages in the flicker of the firelight. He mumbled something to himself and then gave the journal back to Abe. Leaning back in his chair, Hank placed his hands behind his head and closed his eyes. Abe waited and watched as the grizzled man appeared to have fallen asleep, but his lips moved like he was talking to someone in a dream. Then his eyes flashed open. Hank leaned forward in his chair towards Abe. "Tell me, what happened to this silver object?" Stunned, Abe looked down at his drawings and then back to Hank's serious face. The orange flames of the fire reflected in his eyes. "How did you know it was made of silver?" "I'll tell you." Hank pinched his scruffy bottom lip. "But first you tell me what's become of it." "We returned the spearhead," Abe replied. "It belongs to a widow in town who said she found it along the old Ute trail." Hank sighed with relief, but concern was still evident in the creases around his eyes and mouth. He turned to Abner. "Does anyone else know about this?" Abner rocked back and forth slowly in the chair. He had pulled out a pouch of tobacco and was stuffing the sweet-smelling leaves into the bowl of his pipe. "Yes, most of the ranch hands know about it. Folks in town have been talking. And Dunraven." Hank's jaw tightened at the mention of the rancher's name. Abner continued, "It appears that his foreman, Ted White, somehow got his hands on it. I surmise by illegitimate means. Abe here came upon White and his crew attempting to bury it somewhere on Dunraven's ranch." Hank, his bushy eyebrows raised in surprise, turned to Abe. "Bad timing, I guess." Abe rubbed the back of his neck. "They caught me and locked me up. Of course I got away, then I dug up the thing and brought it here." Hank scratched his beard where it grew thick along his chin. "Then you returned it to the woman in town?" Abner nodded. "I had one of the boys deliver it to Mrs. Cartwright." Abner struck a match and lit his pipe. He offered the pouch to Hank, who took it and withdrew a pipe from the inside pocket of his buckskin jacket. "I've got a bad feeling, Abner, about Dunraven being involved." "Mr. March," Abe began. Hank cleared his throat. "I know, kid, you're wondering how I knew the thing was made of silver." He lit his pipe. Abe could hear the leaves sizzle. "What I'm going to tell you both, you got to swear to keep between us." Abe and Abner both nodded. "In all my wandering and trapping, I've been fortunate enough to be counted a friend among many of the native peoples. They all have their tales, but there's one old story I've heard a handful of times, and by old I mean real old. It's been passed down from what called the ancient ones. Further south, I've heard 'em referred to as the Anasazi, a people who vanished from the earth." Abe's imagination had been captured. He rested his elbows on his knees, cradled his chin in his hands, and listened. "It's told with different details, but every version of the story tells of two silver spearheads." Hank paused to take a draw from his pipe. "Like I said, there were two of 'em. One of the spearheads they call the Key, and the other was named Spinning Star. As the story goes, the objects were fashioned of moonlight, liquid silver that fell from the sky as shooting stars. A young warrior, one of these ancient ones, was on a vision quest when he saw the stars streak across the sky. He followed their path and found them in the dirt, still pulsing with the light of the moon. He took them and became their keeper. The warrior then wandered the land for nearly 100 years, and into the silver surface of the spearheads he carved something more valuable than the silver itself." Abe inhaled a deep breath, as if he was trying to take in the mystery of what he was hearing. Hank rested the pipe on his knee. "As some tell it, the key unlocks a treasure, something the warrior found and hid deep in the earth. Other versions of the story say that he discovered a great river of silver flowing inside the mountains, and whoever has the spearheads can use them to find the treasure, or the river, or whatever it is the warrior discovered. Some versions of the story say that the warrior separated the key from the spinning star, hiding the key somewhere in the north and the spinning star in the south. Abner stood up, placed two thick logs on the fire, and then turned around to warm his backside. So you're afraid that Dunraven will get his hands on it again and find the treasure? Hank grimaced. First off, Hank March ain't afraid of nothing. However, you could rightly say that I am concerned. The faintest curve of a smile lifted Abner's lips. I stand corrected, Hank. No offense taken, friend. He smiled at Abner, and the tight lines of worry on his face softened. Hank paused and thought for a moment, and the concerned look returned. It ain't just him, though. It's folks like Dunraven. Abe could feel a note of anger in Hank's voice. Men are moving in from the east, men who don't care about the land. They've only got a mind for what they can take out of it, going about digging holes in the earth, killing all the deer and the elk, and when they've drained all the good out of a place, they move on to the next spot to do the same. Abe's thoughts went back to the city, to the factory and the kids who had worked beside him. He remembered the acrid smell of chemicals, iron, and burning coal. He could see the river through the dirty factory windows, one that had once flowed clear, now murky and clogged with debris. If there really is a treasure, Hank's jaw stiffened. Those Dunraven types will use it to buy up, control, and ruin everything. Hank went silent. Abner picked up a metal poker leaning against the fireplace, moved the logs around the fire, and sat back down. Hank, I sense that there's more you want to tell us. Hank nodded. I do. Not 3 months back I come out of the woods and into the town of Bozeman to get supplies. Two men, well dressed and armed, came looking for me. Said they were employed by some company associated with the railroad and were doing what they called intelligence gathering. These two fellers got wind that I'd traveled most of the country between Bozeman and Santa Fe, and heard that I was on friendly terms with a number of the tribes. So they asked me if I ever seen or heard anything about a big arrowhead made of silver. Of course, I lied to 'em. Hank laughed to himself. Then they gave me this calling card. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket, pulled out a small card, and handed it to Abe. And they said that if I heard anything, to contact their employer. Abe read the card. Stanley Ferguson, Yellowstone National Park Improvement Company. He handed it back to Hank, who threw the card into the fire, where it curled and quickly turned to ash. Hank leaned back in his chair. I asked around about this Ferguson character. Guess he's one of those Easterners trying to gather up investors. Mining down south. Railroad work up north. He's got more irons and more fires than he knows what to do with. You know how it works, Abner. It's a big land out here, but word travels fast, and the folks in town who know about Mrs. Cartwright's silver object, they're going to talk. And that talk is going to work its way up to Bozeman, if it hasn't already, and eventually to this Ferguson feller. Abe felt stirring in his belly, like fear and excitement swirling around together. He stared into the glowing embers of the fire, and he could feel his heart beat slow. It became stronger, like it was trying to match its beating to the rhythm of a distant drum. Hank's next words came from that same far-off place, somewhere over mountains and rolling plains beyond time itself. Abe, I've got a sense that you happened upon that silver spearhead for a reason. Hank's eyes glimmered in the firelight. Might be happenstance, might even be providence, but my gut says that you've got a part to play in all this. Abe's mind took him back to the summit of Long's Peak, the cold wind in his face, and hundreds of miles of country stretched out below him. He felt a calling, a responsibility. He looked at Abner, then to Hank. I don't know what you've got in mind, but I'll do it. The end. The story continues in Book 2, Discovery in Great Sand Dunes National Park. I hope you'll join me for the next book in the series. Thank you for joining me now.